The morning they handed me a cardboard box and a smile that didn't reach their eyes, I sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes before I could make myself drive anywhere. I didn't cry. I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the concrete pillar in front of me, thinking about how I had given that company 9 years of my life. 9 years of staying late, of skipping vacations, of answering emails at midnight while my friends were out living theirs. And they had handed me a box with a bamboo plant, a coffee mug, and a sticky note that said, "Best of luck, Claire," in handwriting I didn't even recognize. The layoff wasn't just the job. I need you to understand that. It wasn't just the paycheck. My apartment lease was up in 6 weeks. I had been planning to renew it, had already told my landlord I was staying, but without the salary, I couldn't cover the rent on my own. I had savings, but not the kind that could carry me through months of uncertainty in a city where a one-bedroom cost more than some people made in a month. I had done everything right, or at least I thought I had. I had been responsible. I had built a life that looked solid from the outside. And in the span of one Thursday afternoon, the floor had simply disappeared beneath me. I called my brother that evening. I sat in my car in front of my apartment building because I needed the privacy, and I told him everything. I told him about the box, about the bamboo plant, about the lease. I told him I wasn't asking to move in forever, just a few months, maybe 2 or 3, while I found something new. He had the space. He and his wife had bought a 4-bedroom house 2 years earlier, and their kids were grown and gone. There were 2 empty rooms just sitting there collecting dust and whatever hopes people put into rooms they don't use. He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the television in the background, something with a laugh track. "Claire," he said, and the way he said my name already told me everything. "The timing isn't great." I asked him what he meant. He said his wife's sister might be visiting. He said they were thinking about turning one of the rooms into a home office. He said it would be a lot of disruption. He said, "You're resourceful. You'll figure something out," in the tone people use when they've already decided the conversation is over. I asked him if he was serious. He said he was sorry, but yes, he was serious. I drove home and sat on my couch in the dark for a long time. I thought about all the times I had shown up for him. The weekend I drove 4 hours to help him move. The money I lent him after his first business fell apart, money he had never paid back. Money I had never mentioned again because I didn't want to make him feel small. The hospital waiting room where I sat for 6 hours when his wife had her gallbladder out, bringing coffee and sandwiches and making sure he didn't have to sit alone. He couldn't give me a room for 2 months. When the lease ended, I packed what I could into storage and the rest into my car. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being dramatic. I applied for jobs every single day, morning, afternoon, sometimes late at night, parked outside a coffee shop to use the Wi-Fi, and I told myself that any week now, something would come through. I kept my gym membership because it gave me a shower and somewhere to go in the mornings. I found a 2-4-hour diner 3 miles away where nobody asked questions if you nursed a cup of coffee for 2 hours. I learned which parking lots had good lighting and which ones didn't. I learned how cold a car gets at 3 inches the morning in October when the wind comes off the lake. I did not call my brother again. I had my pride, and I had my phone, and I chose to keep both of them intact. What I did not have was any idea that my grandmother had changed her will 6 months before she died. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had passed away the previous spring, about 8 months before I lost my job. She had been 81, sharp until almost the very end, and she had died peacefully in the house she'd lived in for 50 years. I had loved her deeply and grieved her quietly, the way she would have wanted. She had never been a woman for fuss. She made good coffee, kept a beautiful garden, and told the truth even when it was uncomfortable. In that way, I suppose, she was the opposite of almost everyone else in my family. Her estate had gone into probate, which I knew in a vague background kind of way. I had been listed as a beneficiary years ago, along with my brother and 2 cousins. I had assumed it would be a small split, some furniture, maybe a little money, and that the process would take time. I had not thought much about it while I was busy losing my job and my apartment and my sense of the ground beneath my feet. So when the email came from an attorney's office in late November, I was sitting in my car outside the public library, trying to stay warm. I almost dismissed it as spam. The subject line was formal and dry. Estate of Margaret Ann Holloway. Notice of distribution. I opened it half distracted, expecting something routine. I read it 3 times before I believed it. My grandmother had revised her will the previous winter. She had removed my brother from it entirely. I didn't know why yet, and I wouldn't find out until later, and she had left everything to me. Not a split, not a portion. Everything. The house on Delwood Street, which she owned outright. Her savings account. A small investment portfolio her late husband had started decades ago, and she had quietly maintained ever since. I sat in that cold car outside that library, and I pressed my hand over my mouth, and I did not make a single sound. The attorney's email said the probate process was nearly complete and asked me to contact the office at my earliest convenience. I stared at those words, earliest convenience, and almost laughed. I was living in a Civic with a broken seat warmer. I had nothing but convenience and time. I called the next morning from the library parking lot. The attorney was calm and professional, and she walked me through everything. The house had been appraised. The savings and investments, combined, were more than I had earned in the past 5 years at my old job. She asked if I wanted to schedule a time to come in. I said yes. I said I would be there that afternoon. I drove to that appointment in clothes I had ironed at the laundromat, with my hair done and my shoulders back, and I sat across from that attorney and listened to her explain that my grandmother had loved me enough to make sure I would never truly fall. I held myself together through the entire meeting. I cried in the car afterward, but that was between me and the steering wheel. I used part of my first distribution to stay in a motel for a week while I handled the paperwork for the house. I want to be clear about the money so there are no questions. My grandmother's savings covered everything that followed. I had been careful with my own money during those months in my car. I had not touched my emergency fund, small as it was, and I didn't need to. Within 3 weeks of that email, I had the keys to a house on Delwood Street. A house with a garden that was sleeping for winter and a kitchen that still smelled faintly of her coffee. I didn't tell a single person in my family. I took my time. I changed the locks the first day not because I was being dramatic, but because good sense is good sense, and I had learned recently to trust my instincts. I had the utilities transferred to my name. I had a neighbor's teenage son help me move my storage unit into the house on a Saturday for $50 and a home-cooked meal. The first real one I'd made in months. I set up my laptop in the kitchen and kept applying for jobs because the house was mine, but I still wanted to work, still wanted to build something that was fully my own. I found a job in February, a good one, with a company that valued the 9 years of experience I had walking in the door. I started on a Monday and came home that evening to my house, and stood in the kitchen and made myself a cup of coffee in my grandmother's old percolator and thought, okay. Spring came. The garden woke up. I learned which bulbs my grandmother had planted along the south fence, watched them come up in colors I hadn't expected: deep purple, pale yellow, a red so dark it was almost brown. I bought a pair of gardening gloves and figured it out as I went. I had gotten quite good, it turned out, at figuring things out as I went. It was my neighbor across the street, a retired woman named Patricia, who had known my grandmother for 30 years, who first mentioned that people had been asking about the house. She said it in her careful, diplomatic way, standing at my garden gate one morning while I was pulling weeds. "A man called my house," she said. "Said he was family and asked if I knew who was living here now. I told him the house was well taken care of and left it at that." I thanked her. I knew exactly who had called. My brother found me on a Thursday evening in April. I was in the garden when I heard the car pull up, and I looked up and saw him and his wife getting out, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something quieter and more certain than anger, like a door closing softly. I stayed where I was. I didn't walk to the gate. I let them come to me. My brother looked older than I remembered. His wife was carrying a bottle of wine, which I thought was a very interesting choice given the circumstances. They stopped at the garden gate, and my brother looked at the house and then at me, and he had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "Claire," he said, "we've been trying to reach you." I told him I had a new number. He asked if he could come in. His wife smiled, the smile she always smiled when she wanted something wide and warm and completely deliberate. I set down my trowel and pulled off one glove and then the other, taking my time. I looked at my brother. I thought about October nights and parking lots, and the way cold air sounds when there's nothing between you and it. I thought about a laugh track on a television, and you're resourceful. You'll figure something out. I told him no. His wife's smile flickered. My brother's jaw shifted. He said he just wanted to talk. He said we were family. He said Grandma would have wanted us to be close. I said that was an interesting thing to bring up, given that Grandma had apparently agreed with me about the meaning of family. That landed. I watched it land. His wife took a small step forward and said something about how they were between things. Right now, her sister's visit had not gone well. There had been some financial stress. They were looking at their options. She used the word temporarily, and she used it the way my brother had used it with me, as a word that's meant to sound reassuring but is really meant to close off further questions. I listened to all of it. I let her finish. Then I said, as simply as I could manage, no. My brother said my name again, sharper this time. I said that when I called him last fall, I wasn't asking for charity. I was asking for 2 months in an empty room. I said I remembered what he told me. I said I remembered the exact words. And I said that I had taken his advice. I had figured something out. I had figured out quite a lot, actually, on my own, while my fingers went numb in a parking lot, and I ironed my clothes at a laundromat and ate oatmeal I made with hot water from a gas station tap. His wife started to say something about how they hadn't known how bad things were. That if they'd known, I said they did know. I had told him on the phone. I had been specific. The garden was quiet. Patricia's porch light was on across the street. A bird was doing something complicated in the oak tree at the corner of the yard. My brother said, "So that's it? You're just going to hold a grudge?" I told him this wasn't a grudge. A grudge was when you were still angry. I told him I wasn't angry anymore. I had used up all my anger in October and November and December, and what was left over had been very useful for learning how to survive, and then for learning how to build. I told him I wished him well. I told him I hoped he figured something out. I picked up my gloves from the garden path and turned back toward the house. He called after me. He said my name 2 more times. His wife said something I didn't catch. I walked up the porch steps and opened the front door and went inside and stood in my grandmother's kitchen with my heart beating very steadily and my hands completely still. I heard their car eventually. I heard it pull away. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and thought for a long time about my grandmother. I thought about the winter she had changed her will, while I was still employed and had no idea what was coming. I thought about how she had watched our family for 8 decades with those clear, patient eyes. I thought about how she used to say, "People show you who they are, Claire. The trick is believing them the first time." Later that week, I sat down with my own attorney. I had one now, which still felt strange and solid at the same time, and I updated my own will. I was 38 years old, and I had a house and savings and a job I liked, and a garden that was coming in beautifully, and it seemed like the right time to be intentional about all of it. I thought carefully about who I wanted to leave things to. I thought about my friend Danny, who had sent me a Venmo for $40 when I told her I was in a rough patch, without asking a single question. I thought about my cousin Miriam, who had driven to the storage place and helped me carry boxes in the rain. I thought about Patricia across the street, who had watched over this house for 30 years because she had loved the woman who lived in it. I did not think about my brother for very long. He was not difficult to place. When spring moved into summer, the roses along the back fence bloomed in colors I had never seen in my own yard before. I learned their names from a book I bought at the library, Sale Heritage Roses, planted before I was born, blooming because someone had tended them faithfully for 50 years. I tended them now. I learned what they needed. I made mistakes and corrected them. I asked Patricia questions over the fence, and she answered them with the generosity of someone who loves the thing they're teaching. I got stronger that year in ways I don't have precise language for. Not harder. I want to be clear about that distinction, because I've thought about it a lot. Harder would have been closing off. What happened to me was the opposite. Sleeping in a car for weeks while applying for jobs every day teaches you what's real. It teaches you what matters and what is performance. It teaches you that the people who show up when you have nothing are worth more than every person who shows up when you have something to offer them. My brother called once more. In June. He had a different tone this time, quieter, less certain of himself. He said he had been thinking. He said he knew he had handled things badly last fall. He said he was sorry. I listened. I let the silence after the word sorry sit for a moment. I told him I appreciated him saying it. I told him I accepted it in the spirit it was offered. And then I told him, as gently as I could, that an apology was not the same thing as trust, and that trust was the thing that had actually been lost, and that I didn't know yet whether it could be rebuilt, and that I needed him to understand those were two separate conversations and I was only having one of them today. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he understood. I don't know if he did. But I said what was true, and I let him carry it however he needed to carry it. What I know is this. I am sitting in my grandmother's kitchen on a Tuesday morning with coffee in her percolator and her garden visible through the window, everything green and blooming in the early summer light. I have a job that respects my time. I have friends who showed up when I was down to nothing. I have a neighbor who taught me the names of roses. I have a will that reflects exactly who I love and why. And I have learned the hard way, the real way, the way that takes place in cold parking lots and library Wi-Fi and laundromat ironing boards, that the life you build after the floor drops out is the most honest one you'll ever live. Because there is no performance in it. There is no audience. There is only what you actually do when no one is watching and nothing is promised and the morning is cold and you have to get up anyway. I get up every morning now and I go into the garden before work. I have coffee and I pull whatever needs pulling and I water whatever needs water. I am learning to read what a plant needs before it shows distress to see the early signs, the slight lean toward light, the first change in color at the edges of a leaf. I think my grandmother knew how to do that. I think she saw the early signs in all of us, long before we showed them clearly. I think that's why she changed her will on a quiet winter afternoon and didn't tell a single person. She believed me the first time, even before I had shown her anything, even before I knew there was anything to show. I think about that a lot. I think about what it means to be seen by someone before you fully become the thing they see. I think it might be the most generous act one person can offer another. I try to do that now, too. I try to look at people early. I try to believe what I see. And I have learned without bitterness. I want to be clear about that, to believe the people who do not come when you need them, to believe them completely and permanently, and without spending too much more energy on it afterward. Not because I am hard. Because I am finally, after everything, honest. The roses are blooming along the back fence. The coffee is good. The morning is mine. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is, in the end, everything.